Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Edmund, and this is Noelle. Okay, so Noelle has done something that I'm totally jealous of. She's won the Eisenhower Fellowship, and she's gone around the U.S. for almost 2 months to visit all the best schools in America. It's something I've always wanted to do. She's gone to America for almost 2 months, visited all the best schools, and she's here to share with us about what she's found. So, Noelle, where do you go?
So I went to 10 cities, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and all the way down to North Carolina, Durham. And then I went to New Orleans, and I went up to Chicago. Chicago was really cold. And then I went to San Diego, then San Francisco, and then Phoenix.
Wow.
And then I went to Boston, New York, and back to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is where the Eisenhower Fellowship head office is.
So now, Noelle, bring us through this journey that you went to. What's the first city that you landed in?
So I landed in New York, then I went to Philadelphia. So in Philadelphia, I visited a boarding school. It's a very old boarding school. But this school is called Girard College. It was started for boys who came from low-income families, and you know, it isn't so conducive for them to stay at home to study, so they are brought to this school, and they're given a very good education. It accommodates mainly African Americans now, and I think they've done quite well. And I think one of the things about the schools in general that I visited, I was so enamored about curriculum and pedagogy before I went to the US. I really wanted to study how they did their curriculum, how they did pedagogy. But I think what the big message that I got out of the trip when I came back was really about culture. You have to set the right culture, and to do that you have to have the right leadership. It starts from the school leaders itself. And when we talk so much about teachers in Malaysia, I think we need to look at the school leaders as well. I'm sure we have some very good principals, and I'm sure you've heard of schools where they suddenly transform from being a very poor school, and they suddenly, you know, start producing sports people, producing debaters. I think that has to do with the school principal who said, look, we're going to change.
Right, so you landed in New York, you went to Philadelphia, and
Washington,
then
D.C.
you went on to Washington.
D.C.
Okay.
Yes, and in Washington, D.C., I also went to see the Gates Foundation. As you know, they're big on their healthcare work in Africa.
That's right.
But they are doing a lot on education, but for the US. Their focus for education is in the US, and they see that as a big priority. The Gates Foundation is pushing for the Common Core standards in the US. Of course, there's mixed feedback about the Common Core. Yeah, it's a common standard that they hope that all states in the US can achieve. Because the states all have their own exams, so the standards are different. Hence, that's why there's a need for SATs, so that universities can see a common exam result.
And so in America, there is no common syllabus.
Yes, no
common syllabus. And that's why there's a common core.
Like a guide for schools to achieve. To know that they've achieved, they've mastered certain standards.
So where do you go in Washington, D.C.?
So Gates Foundation, and I visited several non-profits who work with school leaders and also teachers on how to improve teaching, how to improve leadership. And one of the things I learned, which, you know, my fellowship was really focused on how they work with minorities, the African Americans and Hispanics, basically in lower income neighborhoods. Yeah, so I talked to some of the non-profits, and there was an interesting point that they raised about how science is taught to minorities. If you are somebody who comes from an environment where it's very communal, where it's very community-based, very family-oriented, like, you know, there are many people staying maybe in one household, or they get together very frequently. You have to maybe teach certain subjects slightly differently.
How come?
Maybe there's more group work that's needed, rather than individual assignments given.
So
and
why is that the case?
I think so that then, as a student, if say you're a student of color, you don't feel out of place when you're in class. Class doesn't feel such an alien environment. It feels like it's just an extension of your home.
That's interesting.
Yes, so these were some possibilities that were discussed, and then when I remember when I listened to an iTunes talk, and they talked about how do you get more minorities into STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, and maths careers. and they said liberal arts colleges do produce a disproportionate number of people who get into science careers, and when they trace it back, liberal arts colleges provide very supportive environment, a very collaborative environment in in producing that kind of talent that we want.
Right. Okay, so that's Washington DC. You went to the Gates Foundation. You went to a couple of schools,
non-profits, School Without Walls.
Okay.
Then I went to New Orleans. I visited was a Science Academy of New Orleans. So it's one of the best performing charter schools there. More than 90% of the schools in New Orleans are charter schools.
How many percent?
More than 90%.
90?
Yes, are charter schools.
What happened to all the public schools?
Yeah, they all converted to charter schools.
It works?
I think so, it works, yeah. Apparently they are very satisfied with the results.
Wow.
Of course, they're still falling behind. I mean, they're not falling behind, but they're behind many states in the US, but they've improved.
So they've moved forward from where they were last time when it was all public schools?
Yeah, so I think the idea is when an entrepreneur comes in to run the school, they have skin in the game.
Wow.
And more motivated to push up standards. So this particular school that I went to, Science Academy, everybody I spoke to said, oh, you need to see them. So I went to see them. I met the founder, Dave Markovitz. Science Academy, the way they're run is quite similar to KIP.
Right.
Yeah. The number one thing when they recruit teachers, the teacher has to believe that every child will succeed, to guide that child accordingly. And so, for example, the principal told me that in one of his class observations, he went to this class, and then the maths teacher put a problem on the blackboard, and she told the students, try to solve it. And immediately he perked up, and the teacher and him, a teacher noticed that, and then she knew she, in his eyes, from his point of view, made a mistake. The correct thing to say, in his view, from his point of view, is that solve the problem. That is what she should have said, not try to solve the problem. Try means there's an option, right? It's okay to fail.
I think I read this in KIP. They say everyone will learn. Not, I mean, they don't, whether you want to learn or not, everybody will learn. And it's probably more important.
Or everyone will succeed, or everyone has no choice but to solve that problem. It's like the thought is not even put in your head that there's a possibility you might not know how to solve the problem. So and then I went to High Tech High School. So that's like one of the rock stars of charter schools. It's been profiled in many books. For example, Sir Ken Robinson's books.
What's so special about High Tech High?
Yep, they do project learning. Of course, you may say a lot of schools also do project learning, but this school really focuses almost entirely on project learning. So their assessments are based on projects. Projects means they have to write essays, they have to do internships, they have to go out and collect information, and they have to publish information.
I guess the question in a lot of people's minds is, how are they graded? I mean,
so they are graded according to not just the teacher's assessment, it's also the public assess their projects. So the student every term has to come out and talk about their project, and the parents will be there, and a community leader will be there, and parents of your friends will be there. So, and that's how life is, right? You're never assessed by one person, you're assessed by society. So the 10th graders, they did a project on biomimicry, basically understanding how designs can mimic nature in order to solve problems. For example, paint. The materials that is used for paint. Can we look at how animals, for example, how animals protect themselves? What is on their shell? Their shell. Is there a protective coat on their shell? Can we mimic those kind of properties on paints for buildings?
And there's a book about that. They
wrote a book about that. Yes. So from that's where you can bring in your biology concepts. You can bring in some chemistry concepts, some physics concepts into it.
Wow.
Teacher.
So what do Malaysian schools do differently from American schools?
I think what maybe Malaysian schools, and there are probably some very good schools in Malaysia. Yes, to be fair, at least one thing when I was in the US, I had a lot of opportunity to reflect on my own education, and I think we get very preoccupied as a society about rules. The rule that we should not break, we break them and allow people to get away with it.
But that doesn't sound like you at all.
Yeah, the rules that don't really need to be there are there, and they are enforced.
Right.
So why are we so enamored by small little rules when there are bigger rules that should be enforced?
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
and when you bring that down to schools, sometimes some rules are just not necessary. And I speak from my own school experience, and I suspect that's the same for many schools. I think the schools are a reflection of our society. So when you say what is wrong with our schools, maybe we should look at our society, what is wrong with our society.
That's interesting. It's kind of like that statement I heard, our government's only as good as our people.
Yes.
Right? So everybody blames the government, but really, come on, it's us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a chicken and egg situation. The schools are producing a certain kind of people, and they are going to their society, and then yet society is the one dictating how schools should be run. So it's this endless cycle.
So all the time when blaming government, we should be looking at ourselves and saying, hey, maybe there's something we could do. We could change ourselves.
And it shouldn't all be about grades. I know there's this drive for SPM, and schools are dictated by their performance in SPM and some of the other public exams. But what about developing that child?
So what's the way forward for Malaysia?
Charter schools.
And just for the benefit of people who don't really know the definition of what charter school is, charter school is...
Charter schools can be public schools that are run by private operators.
And basically the government pays the private operator.
Pays the private operator.
So basically it's just as simple as rather than funds going to a public school anyway, it goes to you or a private operator.
Yes.
And
Yes, and of course some people will argue that's not the entire solution. It's one solution, but it's not the 100% solution. It's one solution. The solution is because there's an entrepreneur now who's going to put in capital, who's going to put in his time to run the school for a small profit. He's going to make sure the school is damn well run, He's the one who's going to make sure the school has the best possible grades.
That's right.
Because he wants to build a reputation, he wants to build a brand.
Yes.
So and he'll run it like a business.
Awesome. Okay, in closing already, is there any messages that you'd like to give to government?
I have 3 points. Really. In terms of curriculum.
Okay.
But I know the government's working on this to raise the standards for English and history. We have to relook how history is being taught. I think there has to be a bigger component of world history. I'm getting very granular here. And of course, maths and science, that has to be reviewed. Is that in line with 21st century teaching and the content itself?
Okay.
Yes. And then the second point really is to make good quality education more affordable. So I know that international schools and some parents are breaking their backs to send their kids to international schools. But maybe there are ways to make it more affordable so that it can reach out to a bigger middle class. Of course, we talk about the charter schools, but even what about international schools? And thirdly, invest in school leadership. We talk a lot about teachers, but what about the school leaders? What sort of investments are we making? And how are we promoting teachers to become school principals?
And when you say invest, what do you mean by invest? Because I know there's a lot of kursus or courses that is being held for all these teachers or principals, but I'm not sure if that's
private operators allowed to operate in this space?
Right.
I mean, if they're not, then maybe it's time we open up for... Maybe some private operators are allowed, but maybe that criteria needs to be reviewed how we are tendering out the projects.
Okay. Wow. And I love having you here today because you're very positive, aren't you? I mean, you've seen something really amazing, and you actually bring it here to Malaysia. So thanks, Noelle.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, if you want us to create more videos like this, then like and share this video with your friends. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And for thousands more videos like this, go to this link down here. And finally, subscribe to us by clicking on my face.